Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to this conversation about birthing your feminine power. I'm Reverend Catherine Ewing. I'm known as the Sacred Heart Alchemist and Emotional Freedom Catalyst. And I'm delighted to be hosting this series. And I'm going to just hand over to my guest, Megan Hale. I'm just delighted to have Megan here. We just met really and became acquainted a couple of weeks ago because I was looking at other women who are out there talking about feminine power and birthing our feminine power and stepping into our leadership with the energy of more of the divine feminine rather than the old way of doing things. And delighted to find some similarities with Megan. I love that she calls herself a retired psychotherapist because I am also retiring from psychotherapy. Officially this past week, I've let go of all of my affiliations with insurance and all of that kind of thing to really step more fully into this coaching and mentoring and guiding and birthing process, both with women and men, because for me the work is so much about balancing both the divine masculine and the divine feminine within ourselves first, of course, because then we can begin to anchor that into the world and create the kind of world that we all want. And I know you're expecting, right, Megan? So you want this for the child that's coming into the world. And I have today my grandson turns 11 months. So clearly for my children and grandchildren, I want a different kind of world than the sometimes crazy world we're living in right now. And I call that creating heaven on earth. So with that said, I'm just going to turn it over to you and allow you to introduce yourself and share with the audience who you are and what you do in the world and your passions and your mission. And then we'll just take off into this conversation. So.
Like a plan for me. So thank you, first of all, for having me and letting me be a guest for your conversation. For everyone who doesn't know me, I'm Megan Hale. I'm a retired psychotherapist, an enoughness coach, and a fierce feminine leadership mentor for women. And basically what I help my clients do is really break through the stories of not enough so they can step forward into the leadership that their dreams are calling for. For me, the feminine component has shown up as a result of the enoughness work. For most of my life, I was really in more of the masculine energy and not really realizing it. And it wasn't until I started doing my own work of getting into my stories of what it meant to be a woman, what it meant to be successful, what it meant to be happy, what it meant to be enough, that I really started to embrace this feminine quality that I think that my soul was begging for on some level.
Yes.
I think that, authenticity is a big component to enoughness work. And when we are women and we are not embracing our feminine essence, our feminine energy, it's going to be really difficult for us to feel completely authentic because there's that little component that's missing. And so what I've noticed for me in my journey is that there's really this balance, and balance is kind of a word that I use very lightly because it's different for everyone. But for me, there has been this balance of learning how to rest in the feminine energy and not necessarily making the masculine bad. So creating space, creating a container for both of these two energies to exist, because both are incredibly important in being a purpose-driven, woman who's out to serve a mission in the world. So I'm really excited to see what comes out of this conversation.
Yeah.
We're just going to blab it out.
Yeah. There's already so many things that you've said that I want to respond to. So I'm practicing good listening.
Yes. Well, let's go for it.
Yeah. So welcome. I really am so delighted. So delighted to have you here. And, there are so many directions that we could go. But first, I want to talk about this idea of enoughness or not enoughness, because, I've got a few years on you and, I've been working in the field, if you will, for nearly 40 years with young girls, young women in midlife, women who are in major life transitions. And regardless of age, situation in life, condition, experience, this idea of I'm not enough is really, and I think I read this somewhere, the number one limiting belief of all women. Now, everybody's version of that is a little different. I'm not smart enough. I'm not funny enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not competitive enough. I'm not laid back enough, right? It's like Jello, right? It's too hard or too soft or too hot or too cold, right? It's like, so there's no way of winning this I'm not enough thing until we get to a place in our own awakening, if you will, where we do this complete, and I don't even want to call it a mindset shift because it's so much deeper than just the mind, right? It's a real shift in our understanding of ourselves as spiritual beings. Mm-hmm. That we were born enough. We came into this incarnation, into this human body that we chose, being enough.
Yes.
We forget that, right? We come through the veils or whatever we call that. We come into this 3D physical existence and we forget that we are actually spirit in human form. It sounds so cliche, but I don't think you can hear it enough and take it in enough to remember who we really are. And then when we can do that, it's like, oh, okay. And the stories that you have spoken about and that I also talk about, I think anyone doing this work, we talk about these stories, they really have nothing to do with the truth of who we are.
Yeah.
They are simply the experiences of this lifetime. So we have experience, but we are not our experience. We have emotions, we are not our emotion. We have thoughts, we are not our thoughts. We are so much more than that.
I know. And it's interesting. I think as women, we often lose sight of when all of this pressure starts of not being enough. If you think about being a young girl, for instance, when you're 3 or 4, or even 5, and you're in the checkout line at the grocery store with your mom, and you might be looking at candy bars, but right there at your eye level are magazine covers of women that are presenting themselves in a certain way of what it looks like to be famous, well adored, successful, happy, beautiful. So from a very young age, we're already being influenced by these stories and these messages of what it means to be enough. And it only starts to pile on from there.
Yeah. And actually right next to, the magazine about being beautiful and successful and enough is the one of, the National Enquirer version of how they became a complete failure overnight. Usually something about a guy, but you may not remember these days, but you just reminded me that sort of in my radical feminist days, and we'll talk about that some more too, because as I birth this divine feminist, it's how to bring the feminism, my roots of radical feminism and the divine feminine together in a different way. But I can remember being part of crusades to get covers put over the magazines that were at eye level in all the convenience stores, Hustler, Playboy, right? Women, completely exposed, and all of the energy around women as sexual objects that was so taken for granted for so many years. And now, thankfully those magazines have to be sort of behind the counter or someplace where they're not so visible. But that was not that many years ago, where that portrayal of women was, right out there for all the little girls to see, if you will.
Yeah.
And all the not so little girls, I have a 23-year-old daughter, so I'm very much aware of what she was exposed to in terms of how women were portrayed and projected.
Well, I think even like in adolescence, we're much more susceptible to those messages. I mean, just from a developmental standpoint, really starting to awaken to your sense of self and who am I and how am I in comparison to other people. I mean, we're very susceptible to all those messages. So I think it only increases as we get older. Yeah. But I do want to mention too, as you're talking about the stories of not enough, and for women who are listening, stories of not enough don't always sound like not enough. Sometimes they sound like she's prettier than me. She's smarter than me. It comes easier to her than me. It's the sense of comparison. And anytime that we are in that pattern, we're engaging in that pattern, we are replaying a story of I'm not enough or I'm not as good as. They both come from the same space. So I kind of wanted to highlight that because sometimes it's like, well, do I feel like I'm not enough? Like how I don't really say those words that much.
Right.
But they come up in a lot of different sneaky ways.
Yeah.
We need to be aware of.
And thank you for bringing up the comparison, because comparison, in my experience, ultimately leads to competition.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And that's, when a lot of people may not even know, and maybe we can sort of back up and talk about this a little bit when we talk about the masculine qualities or the feminine qualities or the attributes or whatever, exactly what they are. And I can remember, I don't know whether, I know I was in college. I don't remember whether it was in one of my psychology or sociology or women's studies classes where we were doing this exercise of putting up, different kinds of personality traits. And inevitably, all the traits that were more male, sort of certain and logical and reasonable and driven and competitive and, strong and, all of those traits that we would identify as male were people in the class were like, oh yeah, those are the preferable traits, right? Ooh, intuition, nurturing, like all of the things now that we are returning to, because certainly in societies before, this current time, if you will, recognized that nurturing and intuition, connection to our inner guidance, collaboration rather than competition, support rather than stepping over each other, right, to get to the top, those are the kind of qualities that we're talking about. Not that we don't need to be action oriented and move forward and be structured and at times be very direct and need to take action, but from a place of inner knowing, not from a place of ego saying, "Ooh, I got to beat that person," or "I got to do better," or "I got to make," it comes from me. It comes from a heart-centered place rather than, the ego-driven place.
Yeah, and I think, I'm kind of imagining you in this classroom whenever this took place, and like all these words are kind of coming up on the board, and I can just see like this parallel between the masculine traits being strength and the feminine traits being weak. They're soft. And I think that we create this dichotomy that makes it really difficult for us as women to embrace our feminine essence because they have so long been associated with being weaker or being less than or being softer, when in fact, loving someone, nurturing someone, giving to someone, experiencing your emotions, that is sometimes far tougher than being, taking that bold action or being, reasonable and logical and all of those things. Leaning into your intuition, leaning into trust and faith when there is nothing out there to physically back it up. I think that takes a level of strength that we can't even compare the two, really, in my mind.
I agree. But what I saw happening, so I was very active in the women's movement in the 70s. I was one of the first classes, I think, probably nationwide, to actually get a degree in women's studies. It was very early, in that time. It was a minor. We didn't have a major yet. So I did the psychology and sociology and then the women's studies as a minor. But the women's movement then was very, and I think it had to be for the times. I think there's a time for everything. So in no way am I judging or condemning that time, that movement, those women. I was one of them. A lot of marching, a lot of picketing, a lot of fighting against in an attempt to bring attention to some very significant, inequalities and patterns of subjugation and degradation, which, we've touched on a little bit already. And I believe that that was necessary at that time. Sometimes you have to just be a force, right? And we still don't have the Equal Rights Amendment. So for all of that, fighting, if
still in progress.
We still don't have an Equal Rights Amendment. We have certainly made some progress, but in my growth and in my practice, the movement away from that real radical feminism, marching on Washington, marching in New York, I think it alienated a lot of women because they didn't necessarily want to associate themselves with that radical feminism. So, what I've come to now after sort of so many years as a social and political activist, and then being moved by spirit into a different way of being, particularly through my seminary program. I'm an ordained minister of spiritual peacemaking, and it became, and a student of the law of attraction. So it became very clear to me that I can't be fighting against. This is not the energy that's going to bring the change that I want. As Mother Teresa says, I'll go to a peace rally, but not an anti-war rally. And some people would see those as the same thing, but energetically they're not. Yeah. There's a different energy that you bring to stand in peace than there is to push against war. And so for me, this is the balance that we're coming into, bringing those, what you sort of identified as the weaker or softer, or the perceived weaker or softer energies of love and nurturing and collaboration and support, and listening, and into this process now.
What's so funny about all this, right? And it just completely blows my mind because I've been a high achiever, my whole life, been very driven. I mean, type A, go, go, go kind of girl. Definitely come from that masculine place of like, let's do this, let's take action, let's make stuff happen, right? What I noticed is that success, the journey there, felt way harder than it needed to be. And when I started embracing the feminine qualities of allowing, of resting, of leaning into, like being held, being supported by both the divine and other women, of leaning more into collaboration versus competition, do you know what happened to the journey? It started to feel a whole lot easier. There was so much more ease and peace and flow and grace in my life. And I was like, has this been available to me the whole time?
I could have had a V8, right?
But exactly, like it has really been a really eye-opening experience for me that I really had no idea the value that we carry as women and the way that we can approach our success and our goals and our dreams and our desires. Like I really had no idea the value that it carried.
I'm kind of laughing because, embracing that masculine energy, I grew up with 6 brothers.
Yeah.
So it was really sort of survival of the fittest, right? I had to be one of the guys, and I was very competitive and very type A and very driven, and I had to have all A's, and I had to be the best athlete, and right, always, and I see it in my daughter as well, that very competitive part of our nature, and it didn't seem to me like I was trying to be that way. It was just sort of what I did, right? And who I was. And even though I've been in this arena of transformation and, women's groups and women's consciousness raising groups and all of that, when I look back on it now, it feels like I was in them more with my mind. Mm-hmm. We were talking about things. We were, we were doing, vaginal exams in our health class together, but it was still, it it didn't, for me, and it may have been my own defense or reservation or holding back, where I wasn't fully allowing myself to be there from a heart space. And that for me feels like the difference now. Recognizing after so many years of going it alone, even though I've been in this arena of women and women's work and women's transformation,
Yeah.
It took me a long time to recognize how sacred, I don't even want to just say important, because it is important, but how sacred and transformational, and even those words don't feel quite enough. Speaking of, I'm not enough. Holy.
Yeah.
To really be open-heartedly in a women's circle, a sacred circle, a supportive place, and really
place, right?
a vulnerable place.
Yeah.
Right?
I think for me, it was like, I thought that if I relaxed and I eased into this different way of being, that meant that I was going to lose my drive. I was going to lose my competitive edge. I was going to lose all of the things that made me me. And I was really afraid of that for a very long time, because I didn't see there could be space for both. And what I found, that by leaning into the feminine qualities, it only provides like this beautiful, cushiony, soft support for my drive, but it's so much more authentic, so much more me, and it comes so much more easily than feeling like it always has to be effort after effort after effort after effort. There's still work. There's still doing.
Yeah.
Balanced with being. And before, I didn't have the being part so much. I was just the doing and the thinking. Do.
Yeah.
Think. And now it's kind of like I'm feeling and being too, which creates like this wholeness within me that I didn't have before.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the word being. Again, you keep bringing up these little memories from my past. About 10 years ago, I met someone and he referred to me. So my last name is Ewing, Catherine Ewing, the human doing. I was like, oh, I'm not sure that that's who I want to be known as. And he was absolutely right.
Yeah.
Of course, it was also in a time in my life, I've been through some major transformation, as we all have. And one of mine, probably the most significant, was, leaving a 30-year marriage. At the same time, I had just left my paid employment, opened a holistic healing center. And so everything, and I left my marriage, I left my home, I left my children living with their dad, because I was moving into a 200 square foot room, basically. So at 52, my life was completely turned upside down and inside out. Everything that I knew of my life, the way it had been, was gone, right? The relationship, the marriage, the children on a day-to-day basis, raising the kids, my home, my financial security, my work, my identity, like everything.
It's major.
So I lost my thread there for a moment, but
it's a prime space for a breakdown, but I have no doubt it was also the foundation for a breakthrough.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, I forget my point, the point that I was going to make there, but so the human doing thing. So I was like paddling fast and praying hard and doing everything I could to try to keep my head above water, to try to keep myself together emotionally, to try to figure out myself financially, to try to build a new business in this healing center that I had just opened. And so, yeah, he was absolutely right. I was a human doing. I was also a little bit of a hot mess, a lot of bit of a hot mess. I remember, so I had this therapy practice within the healing center, and I would literally see clients, and between clients, I would run into the restroom and like sob my eyes out, put myself back together.
Carry on. Yeah, you know, I don't know about you, but I had a coach once. It was like right when I was doing the majority of my enoughness work. And he really encouraged me to stop working. And I was like, what? Like, what would you even do? Not working? And he's like, I think it would be good for you to slow down. And I was like, who has time to slow down? Like, this was really like my immediate response. And he'd say, you need to learn how to make hay slowly. And I would roll my eyes like, who has time to do anything slowly around here?
And isn't it interesting that this was a male?
I know. And so, but he was very in touch with his divine feminine now. And so, you know, and he kept on holding this space for me to step into it. And I had so much resistance. And I finally got it. Like when you slow down, it allows things to catch up with you. And you're not always trying to run ahead. You kind of create this space for a lot of energy to come in and support you. And that's where I think inspired action comes from. Amazing creativity. Like you don't have to force it. You don't have to try for it. It just comes to you naturally if you can slow down to receive it. And I was like, wow, I'll never forget this session because I went in, I was like, there's really something to this, you know? And he was like, yeah, I know.
So I'm curious about the creativity. Do you have a particular, so when you say slow down and allow it to come to you, what does that mean for you? Do you sit in meditation, with a mudra? Do you go out into nature? Do you dance? How do you experience that flow of creativity?
It's always different. What I'm very intentional about is when I'm like caught up in the need tos or the have tos, or like this has to come through now. This is due now. And I'm starting to get frustrated because it's not coming. I'm like, you know what? You need to trust that it will come if you go and experience joy.
Mm-hmm. That's
the rule now. So when I'm sitting at my desk for hours looking at a blank Word document, cursor blinking back at me and it's just infuriating me, I'm like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Because this doesn't bring me joy. Like, this is not fun. And so I'll go and do either, a spiritual practice of getting regrounded, getting recentered, surrendering this frustration to God, of creating mantras that remind me that creativity and inspiration are always right there waiting for the space to come in. Or I simply go and do something that is enjoyable, like just go live your life. And more times than not, you take a walk around the park and it's like, bing, download, and you're like, thank you.
Yes.
And I don't think we often realize, like, if we would just get out of our own way and just go and experience joy, creativity and inspiration are always around. They're always out there waiting to come in if you create the space for it.
Well, we certainly know the stories of, the great creators who put it down and walked away, and that's when the information came, right? And it's the same thing when we're trying to force anything, we go into this contraction. And when we're in a contracted state, the information can't come to us. I mean, there's a whole thing about the amygdala, and you know this as a therapist, I'm sure, is the amygdala and the brain. And, we're just not, when we're in that sort of half fight or flight response, the blood flow is different, and we're just not able to access our higher level thinking. But we even see it in sports, when players get tight or they feel rushed or you can see the flow gets disrupted and the movement is just not the same. And it's the same thing, whether we're in business or sports or whatever, when we can, let go of that tension, whether that's, and I find this a lot, just getting out in nature. There are a couple of favorite places where I go here, and the minute I enter, it's like I step into a time warp or something. There's one hiking place in particular where I go to where I literally feel, as soon as I cross a certain threshold where this little bridge is, that something opens up, And
Well,
all of a
your
sudden,
worries seem small. You know, like when you're out there and you're hearing the birds and you're feeling the sun on your face and the wind is there and noticing like like all the stuff that's around you, you realize like you're connected to something so much bigger. And this
mhm,
little worry that you are so concerned about not coming through, it's like you're putting way too much pressure on this. Like, lighten up. It's okay. And the minute you lighten up, it's like, there's this new space, and here comes the inspiration. Like, it is remarkable. And I never thought that I would be able to create such a like massive amounts of content in such a short amount of time. And nor did I think that I could like do it so easily. Like, it flows. When you're in that zone, I mean, everyone's felt it. You're just riding away and you're riding away and everything's coming to you and you're like, this is amazing. And we can have that if we allow it.
mhm. And so that's one of those attributes or elements, if you will, that's more feminine, right? So it's being connected to the earth, being connected to nature, sort of open to this awareness that we're connected to everything, letting go of that thing that think we need to do right in this moment, and then allowing that, you know, download or guidance or intuition, whatever language you want to use about that, to come to us instead of our chasing it, right?
You nailed it. Yes, that is everything.
Mm-hmm.
We can be gravity. We really can be gravity. We don't have to chase. We can bring things. We can call things in. And there's a very different power when you really understand that.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
It's interesting that you would mention gravity. I just picked up Power versus Force, something I read years ago. And I was at a workshop this weekend and the presenter mentioned that book again. And I thought, oh, I want to pick that up again and just sort of refresh, because he was referencing some specific things that I remembered, but not in detail. And so I just picked it up, and I can't remember the exact context, but he talks about the energy field, right? That we create around ourselves. So he's looking at the difference of power, which is always there. It comes from a calm, centered, grounded place of knowing, again, the truth of who we are, and knowing that we are and can attract to us everything that we need or want, versus force, which is the pushing, the against, the chasing. And he used gravity, of course, as an example of, it doesn't move, it doesn't chase after things, it doesn't try, it just is. And within that field, everything else acts as it acts when it's within that field.
No,
So.
and I agree. I think the most impressive examples of power that I've experienced, like coming into touch with other people who are very centered in their power, is that it's very soft and it's very silent and it's very grounded. Like, it's embodied.
It's embodied, and it has nothing to prove.
Yes, nothing to prove. It is simply there. And it is it is the most gravitational pulls I have ever felt. Like, being in the presence of somebody like that, you're just drawn towards them. You don't even know why. You're just like, there's something about you that is just so present that we want more of it. We want to be around.
Yeah. And magnetic.
Yes, magnetic. That's a beautiful word. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said something a little while ago that I love. I'm trying to remember how you said it, but it reminded me of, you said there was, the softness, the creating this having the softness of the feminine. And one of the ways that I describe this to clients, and it just is an imagery for me, is sort of imagining our interior as a vase, if you will. And if that vase is empty, anything that we sort of drop in there, life drops things in, And if there's no cushioning, if there's no softness, it's harsh and it sort of clangs around and it's loud and it's irritating, right? And you can feel the harshness of it. If there's cushioning, right? If there's softness, if we have taken the time to be with ourselves, to do some practices of self-care and self-love. I love Matt Kahn's work, whatever arises, love that, right? When we have created some cushion, if you will, then when life shows up with its challenges, there's a softer place for them to land, right? It's not clanging or quite as harsh.
Yeah. There's like a quality of like we can absorb a little bit. It's like we can receive it, and instead of it, like there's just like a soft bounce back. I found there's a resiliency,
yeah,
softness within yourself, versus like when something happens, you're like down. It's like this huge climb up. I think creating that softness, it's kind of like you just kind of get bounced around a little bit, but you come back up a lot more easily and a lot more quickly. And the emotional component of that has a much different, it creates a different experience for you internally versus the knocked all the way out,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, we touched a little bit before on I have experiences, but I'm not my experiences. And I think that's the difference in the emotions around that. Mm-hmm. When we come to a place of recognizing that we are not that set of circumstances or that thing that happened, or we're not a loser, or we're not, the not enough part, but just that life happens and life flows through us, and it doesn't serve us to identify ourselves as that.
Yeah.
Right? Not I am whatever, a loser, I am stupid or fat or ugly or lazy, but
yeah, but
we've had this experience.
The perspective that you're talking about is really, it comes from leaning in, I think, to the spiritual qualities, whether that's, in the masculine or feminine. I think that just the spiritual component of noticing that you're connected to something much bigger gives you that broader perspective. So when something does come into your life, you don't have to attach yourself to it. This is happening. I can observe it, but I'm not that.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's so reflexive or reactionary, though, for many, many people to just assign that label to ourselves. Yeah. I am that. I am. And I'm sure that when we use the words I am, it's literally calling in the truth of who we are, right? I am that I am, right? It's a very spiritual, those are very spiritual words. So if we are continually telling ourselves, I am whatever, fat, lazy, stupid, not smart enough, it's like we're giving that as an instruction to every cell in our body, which says, okay, because literally it just takes us at our word, right? So that in and of itself is one, I don't want to say simple, but very significant practice to just be aware of the words you are using around yourself, especially what's following the I am statement.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I am. Those are two most powerful words in the universe, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So share, Megan, will you share a little bit more specifically about how you work with clients, whether you work one-on-one, whether you do group work, live events, what's your...
A little bit of everything. I love one-on-one work because it's a very sacred container for us to go very deep. And there's just a lot of vulnerability that happens in the nature of my work, because getting to enoughness is embracing the not enough parts, right? It's embracing the insecurities, and it's embracing the stories that have created those insecurities to begin with and learning to rewrite them. So a lot of courage goes into that work, but on the other side comes a lot of confidence and conviction of who you are and what you're here to do, which I so love. But I also lead group programs because sisterhood is a very big value of mine, of bringing together women who can be open and supportive of one another and hold that space for that radical transformation. And one of the groups I'm leading now, I mean, it's phenomenal to watch how one woman inspires another woman who then inspires her. It's like this beautiful reciprocal dynamic that I just don't think you can put a price tag on. So that's mainly the core of my work now, is one-on-one and group programs.
And is it virtual, all online?
Virtual, yeah. So everything's done via webcam, very similar to this. Yeah. And of course, a lot of homework in between from time to time. My group programs are more structured than my one-on-one work.
Yes.
We're really talking about specific stories, and I just enjoy the guided process a little bit more because it does provide that structure that a lot of people need. But the one-on-one work gives you so much freedom and flexibility to really go
afield, yeah.
And you can stay somewhere a little bit longer if you need to. So luckily, the group program I have right now has that one-on-one component built in. So it's a hybrid, which is really turning out quite beautifully. So I'm very grateful for that. Mm-hmm. But I would love to host retreats in the future. I'm getting ready to relocate to Texas in a few months. So once I kind of get settled and get my bearings, I would love to host an in-person workshop because there's just nothing like a face-to-face and real-life hugs and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I want to let the listeners know, I'm going to put your information in the chat box here as we're talking. So your website
is megan-hale.com.
I want to make sure I've got this right. Just check that and make sure. Okay. Yeah. So I love everything that you said, because I mean, my work is similar to yours in the sense that, I do one-on-one work, I do group programs, and, I have been fortunate to do a lot of workshops and retreats. And as I'm literally this week, I'm letting go of my physical office. And so I won't have that space anymore to do the in-person. And it occurred to me as I was sitting behind my computer, for several days in a row, and I thought, I need to definitely get out, right? Because for so many years, 25 years, well, more than that, but 25 years in the, therapy or coaching world, have been working primarily in person.
Yeah.
And so it's quite a shift for me to be looking at doing most of my work online. So doing those, whether they're, VIP days with people one-on-one or, the workshops and retreats, really making sure that I have that person-to-person, touch-to-touch kind of contact, because that, that really feeds me. It's amazing to me how powerful the virtual work can be. People who aren't familiar with it, they're like, you do what? You Skype or you Zoom or, whatever platform you use. And I was surprised myself at how powerful and deeply you can go even when you're, not physically in the same space.
Yeah. No, I really haven't noticed very many differences at all as far as the quality of the work that you can provide, because the nature of our work is very emotional, and when you know how to create an emotional container, either in person or online, that container goes with you.
Yeah.
It does not contain just to an office. And so what I've noticed is, there can be some very powerful sessions, just like in person, when that emotion is there and y'all are both in that sacred container of doing that work. It's just, it's moving.
Yeah. I think for me, one of the things that because I use essential oils and flower essences and sound healing, and in my office I have a massage table, so somebody can get up, we can do some energy work in the middle of our session. So those are the pieces. Those are the pieces that are a little harder to do. I'll lean over and share a flower essence or an essential oil, or I'll just pull out my bowl and start to do, and it doesn't quite translate the bowl, especially in the same way, through space and time. So those are the pieces where I'm still going to have to do the in-person, because I do think it's, the nature of women is to gather, right? Mm-hmm. We've been gathering around a fire, creating community, raising the children, telling stories, passing down, the audio, the history, right, of our people, of our tribe since the beginning of time. Yeah. And so the ability to still do that and gather in person, I just think is so beautiful and empowering. And I agree. Yeah.
There will never be anything that suffices for in-person experiences, because it's just, there's a different quality to it. It's a palpable quality that you don't pick up necessarily as much online. But as far as creating transformation, oh yeah. Totally accessible any way that you do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I understand what you mean with a lot of your energy practices and everything. That would be quite a shift.
Yeah. One of the things you said about the group was women helping other women. And I love, or someone's insight or someone's story. And that's, one of the things that I love about the group process, because it brings together women who might never otherwise, even if they live next door to each other, right? Because of different life circumstances or different time schedules, or one's home with children and one's going out, to work every day, that they just don't meet, right? And we create stories in our minds. I mean, I do. Maybe I should just speak for myself right now, about other women and what their lives are like based on just what I see of them. And so often when I actually get to know them, I realize how wrong I was in my judgment of them. When you talked before about the comparison, and she always looked so put together. Well, I didn't know she had an autistic child at home, or she's caring for her aging parents, or her son was killed by a drunken driver. Like, we don't know these things about each other until we come together in a place that provides that safe and sacred container where we can really begin to shed, the image or the facade or that outward presentation of ourselves, and really come home to ourselves and to each other.
I love that phrase, coming home. That's a beautiful one. Yeah, and I agree. I think there's just something richer about having an experience of someone of their different layers. It gives you a bigger picture, a bigger appreciation, I think. And that's what happens, in the groups is, when you were first starting to get to know each other, you share just a little bit, and then you share a little bit more. And by the end, it's like, you just have such a love for this other woman who has shown herself to you. And it has really encouraged you to do the same. So totally valuable.
Yeah. And even the word encouraged, you used the word courage before. And I just really want to highlight that, because even though it seems soft and, all of that, it takes tremendous courage to allow yourself to be seen.
Oh, yes.
Especially with that belief that I'm not enough or I'm not good enough, because the fear of judgment or rejection or disapproval or not being supported, right? Or is so much a part of all of our stories, whether we're really, really consciously aware of it or not. Because so much of it, there's our individual story, then there's the collective consciousness, right? The collective wounding, if you will, that we all carry. So even if we don't have an individual story, perhaps of trauma or abuse or anything like that, there is the woman's story that we all carry. And so whether it's in one-on-one work or whether it's in group work, anytime someone shows up with a willingness to really let themselves be seen and shares their challenges, their story, their vulnerability, their heart, it usually makes me cry.
Well, it inspires me. It moves me to just know that that space is so safe for them to really be able to step into that. That's the greatest gift I can ever be given by a client is for them to trust that space enough to let themselves be seen. And that's huge, because that's the foundation from which you can go out into the world and be just as courageous. I think that we all kind of have to have that safe space where we kind of, you know, take off the training wheels a little bit. Maybe we fall a couple times, but we're always learning that new skill. Because I mean, I think courage is a skill, I really do. I think something that you have to practice, and I don't know if you ever master it. I don't think that's the goal. I think it's just continuing to come back to the practice over and over again, and that's what success is.
Yeah. Yeah. You talked about trust, right? People, clients, women trusting you enough to be vulnerable and transparent. And in the process of them learning to trust you, or being safe enough in that process, they're learning to trust themselves, right? I mean, my experience, because so many of my clients have some kind of trauma, whether it's big T or little t, you know, it doesn't, that they've turned down the dial on trusting themselves completely.
I mean, so many of us, we have different messages from when we were young of like, it's not safe to feel, it's not safe to trust, it's not safe to love, it's not safe to think, it's not safe to talk, depending on your upbringing. So, I mean, they're real.
And the frequency and the intensity with which those messages are driven home, right? And so, you know, with something like, in particular, you know, sexual abuse, if a young woman, a child or a young woman discloses and is not believed, or is told, oh, that never happened, don't you ever talk about that again, or your uncle so-and-so would never do that, or, you know, how dare you talk about that person. It creates such a level of confusion in their own mind and body. Did I imagine that? Did that not really happen? Did, you know,
because it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. And so their ability to even trust their own body and their own instincts and that internal alarm system about something's not right here gets so distorted.
Yeah.
And then we see, you know, a history of making bad decisions around relationships, or, you know, self-sabotage, or however that all gets played out. So I just wanted to really highlight that idea of trust, the ability to trust themselves, and then the ability to trust someone in their world, and how that cycles. You know, there's a loop there, that the more they can trust someone, the more they can relax and trust themselves, and then the more they can trust themselves, the more they can trust other people, because they trust themselves enough to so I just love that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's going on in my group program right now. And I don't think sometimes we're aware of how subtle messages are. Like, I'm the oldest, for instance. And so from a very early age, like, I took on this role of being responsible, of helping my mom, of being the big girl, right? But what that really translated to in my mind is that there's not enough space for you to feel, or for you to have a breakdown, or for you to like be dramatic, because you have to be the big girl. Mama doesn't have time to, she's doing all these other children, right? Now, did my mom ever say that to me? Of course not. Would she? No. But that's how I interpreted it. So
right.
In adulthood, you see this pattern of me not feeling my feelings, not feeling safe to feel my feelings, not wanting to cry, not wanting to do this, because that's how I interpreted that message of like, it's not okay to feel. And so sometimes, like, the little t that's a
The little
really
things. Yeah.
very small trauma that had created a really big impact in my life. And so sometimes I think we overlook or we diminish our life experiences of like, oh, it's not that big a deal. They can't.
Or it was in the past and I should be over it by now or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. How many times have I told myself that?
Yeah.
No, it's so true. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up just from my own, personal perspective, that sometimes you can have a really, really happy childhood, great childhood, and still
Right.
have stories you have to unpack.
You don't have to grow up in some completely dysfunctional, or
Painful.
abusive,
Yeah.
abandonment. You don't have to have all of that. Those are the big T's. But it's the day to day. I remember, and I know we're getting to a point where we're going to have to wrap up here, but years ago I was on a teleclass and we were doing some exercises and many of them I had done already, but it was okay, visualize what you want to be doing in the world, right? So I'm seeing myself on a big stage in front of lots of people because that's what I love to do. I love to be, facilitating and moving and leading transformational processes. And then then when you let that go and you say the reason I can't be, do, or have that is, and I figured it would be the typical I'm not good enough or whatever. But what popped into my mind is you can't play with the big boys. Well,
having
there's one meaning that people might assign to that. But in my case, I had 5 older brothers. So imagine how many times, completely innocently or just for my own protection, Catherine, you can't, or Kathy, you can't go with the boys. You can't do what the boys are doing. You can't play with the big boys. You have to stay home. You can't, right? Nobody was trying to abuse me or diminish me or anything else. It was simply a function, right, of age and gender and the times. But somewhere in me, I was holding that belief and I gave it meaning, right? Nothing has meaning until we give it meaning. Yes. And somewhere in me, there was a belief that I couldn't play with the big boys. So that was how that was translating then in my work and in my business was I couldn't be like the Deepak Chopras or the Tony Robbins or the Jack Canfields or the, whoever else, T. Harv Ekers, whoever else I might be imagining to be in those positions of being in front of people and on stage and doing this transformational work because I couldn't play with the big boys. So it's very subtle.
I know. And that's what's so wild about it.
Removing layers and layers, because that was not the first thing. It took, years of doing that work before that particular limiting belief surfaced.
Sure. And that's what I love about being human, because there's just so many layers. And I think when you really embrace inner work and you embrace it as a journey, like it's not a destination, it becomes like this adventure that you're always learning, you're always discovering about yourself. You're always peeling back one more thing of saying, oh, and you get to look at it. It's like a little gift that comes and you're looking at it and you're like, oh, I don't want to believe that anymore. I don't have to. And you get rid of it. It's just a process. It's wonderful.
So I talk just briefly about emotional archaeology, which is that, it's literally sifting through and finding these broken pieces, right, with the stories that we've assigned to them, and then dusting them off and realizing, oh, that maybe didn't really mean that, or that was, I assigned a meaning to that may not, and just taking all these broken parts of ourselves and our story, brushing them off, imagining a new story about them, and then putting them back together in this new mosaic or this new tapestry or this new beautiful expression.
Yeah, that's the process
of how every one of those things brought us exactly to where we are now in this perfect moment.
Yes. And self-acceptance, man, that is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I love it. This is a beautiful conversation.
Yeah. Well, here we are at this perfect moment, 1:00. So I want to thank you, Megan, and wish you many, many blessings in your work and in your in the child that you're going to birth into the world, along with the work that you're birthing into the world. So many blessings and well-being there. And thank you so much for being here with me. And thank you all for listening in, and for those of you who might listen in at a later time. your energy and your presence has made this experience what it has been. So thank you all.
Thank you.
And Catherine Ewing signing off, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Bye.